Hey guys, Nuln here. Today we are going to be speed painting and also assembling the Dark Eldar combat patrol box. Now this video was actually recorded when it just came out, but it's only being put together and probably uploaded now. This is my first video, so I apologize for any frame issues or any other video problems that usually occur, but when I first got the box, I was pretty excited. It's a very big box. I don't think I've ever had a box as wide as this, so I thought I'd just crack right on. I'd start off by building the archon, which does have a bit of modification with spare incubi parts, but let's get on to the reason I need to speed paint this. I was going to be playing a game with my friends in only a couple weeks, but as you'll see, things get a bit more complicated. At this point, I've actually never had a fully painted 40k army, so this was really going to be quite a big thing for me. I had to start off obviously by cutting things out and cleaning up all the sprue marks and then gluing everything together, which is something I'm pretty used to, and this whole process only took about a day. But the real challenge was going to end up being the painting. Now, as you can see here, assembly is really not that difficult. It might be somewhat time consuming, but it's not really compared to the painting stage. I needed to go in with a plan, so I decided to base a scheme off a reference image I'd found, as I can go back and forth for literally years trying to figure out the correct colour scheme for my army. So I decided I'd do a little bit of searching on the web. Now, after a while, I came across this image, which I thought really sort of spoke to me about the Dark Eldar. It seemed sort of cool, dark armor, very mysterious. Personally not a fan of the unhelmeted head options, so this picture seemed to sort of pretty much sum up what I wanted them to look like. So I was going to use a couple of time-saving techniques to try and achieve a look pretty much exactly like this is. Now, here I'm still assembling models, and I'd say this whole process of assembly only took me about a day. Now, it's not quite as easy as I thought it would be, because it turns out every single individual spike on the raiders, which are the big boats, are in fact individual pieces which need to be cut out and stuck on, and yeah, they're actually really hard to get to line up nicely. So that was awfully time consuming, but the vast majority of the build process was thoroughly enjoyable, and I might in fact increase my Dark Eldar in size with a few more of these boats if the opportunity arises. But as you can see, I'm approaching the end of the build stage here. Now, I left a couple things spare. As you can see, I'm just assembling here the final members of the crew that are going to sit on these big boats, which I will paint separately. But this is what we're left with after probably only half a day, so pretty reasonable. I did prime it. I primed it with Wraithbone and then had to go over it again with black. You probably should just start with black, but I didn't have it at the time, so I decided to use my airbrush. You absolutely do not need an airbrush to follow along with this guide, but it could be useful, I guess. So here they are black, but disaster struck here. My old Chinese airbrush had finally run out, so with a little bit of magic I was hoping I could get a new one. Hang on. There we go. Okay, so brand new airbrush, and we're going back to it. Now my army is fully painted black, which means we can start the first process. Now I'm going to be using drybrushing for the honestly vast majority of the surface visible, because most of this army is this dark blue color in terms of its armor. It means that I can really save a lot of time. So here I'm using Stegadon scale green and drybrushing it over all of the armor really. And as you can see, it's building up a sort of very dark bluish color. But I did use a slightly different technique when I was working on the raiders or the big boats, and as you'll see in a second, I'm focusing my dry brushing towards the edges. Now usually you can just dry brush all over the place, but this dry brushing along the edges will be visible in later clips. You can create this sort of gradient all along the edge, which ends up looking really nice in my opinion. So now I'm coming in with Temple Guard blue to build up that highlight a bit more and a little bit of the gradient. Now, you do need to be careful with dry brushing, as I found out. However, it really wasn't a big setback. Gluing together, this is what it looks like at the minute. You can begin to see the gradient building up on the boats here. I have, in between clips, gone and filled in the base with a couple spare bits, but now we're on to brush painting, and brush painting is by far the longest part of the process, and in all honesty, the vast majority of the time this is not something I particularly enjoy. I do like playing with painted armies, but the actual process of just banging out miniature after miniature with brush painting is really not what I'm that great at, so I tried to minimize this step and cheat where I could, because I'd already lost a lot of time to the airbrush issue. It turns out in real life, without the magic of editing, you can't just click your fingers and make it go away. You in fact need to wait several days, but I only had 2 days left, so I started off with the metallics on only that model, and then base coated a heck of a lot of things with Rackarth flesh. Now, I'm going to use washes to tint these in certain directions, but the tabards and the guns and a couple other bits and bobs got covered with Rackarth flesh. Oh, incidentally, the metal colour I'll be using is Leadbelcher. Now, as you can see on these incubi, it's not that difficult to fill in the areas, and there are a couple bits you can cheat with a dark base coat and not actually have to fill in, but once they're done, they look sort of like this. I was feeling they were lacking a bit of detail, so I came back in with deep skin flesh to pick out a few areas on the guns. They have these sort of segment barrel things that fit in, and they seemed like they needed a coat. I did originally paint these shoulder pads with a bronze, but I decided to go in with Leadbelcher and keep the scheme cold. I also picked out a couple of the gems in cold black and gave the tabards a wash with Nuln oil. And also picked out the head symbol. Now, the only thing that was really left to do was to pick out a couple of the skulls and spikes on the boats. I gave these skulls a base coat with Screaming Skull and then a wash with Agrax Earthshade, picked out the floor and the ram with Balthazar Gold, and then gave it a quick dry brush, and now, after the transfers, some time for some grand reveals.